G'day and welcome to another Cuppa with a Jesuit. I'm Father Robin Koning, Provincial Assistant for Vocations for the Australian Jesuit Province. And I'm having a cuppa with some of my Jesuit mates.
With Father Robin, I'm Julian Butler, a Jesuit in formation, and we're joined today by Father Christopher Gleeson. Father Chris, welcome.
Thank you, Julian.
Father Chris, one of your main ministries in Jesuit life has been in education, particularly in schools, secondary schools. Would you tell us a bit about how you began to be involved in schools and what the journey in schools has been for you?
Well, I think it really began with, what we call our regency, which is that area after you finished your, after I finished university studies. And the provincial at the time said, I think it'd be good for you to go into state and leave Melbourne and family and friends behind and go into a school in Sydney. And I was fortunate enough to go to St Ignatius College, Riverview, which is a very large boarding school. And that was quite an eye-opener for me too, because I think I had 102 boarders, year 8 and year 9 boarders in my dormitory on the first night. So that was a rude awakening. But some of those students I'm still connected with. That was 1971, 72. But I loved the 2 years that I had there then. And interestingly enough, the Professor Greg Denning, who was Professor of History at Melbourne University, wrote me a little note towards the end of my time in 1972 and said, how about becoming a tutor in the Department of History at Melbourne University, which was, quite flattering. But I wrote back to him and said, no, look, I think my vocation is really in secondary education and I need to further myself in that area. So that's what I did. And going back to Melbourne after teaching at Riverview and beginning theology at Parkville, I had 4 wonderful years there. I did a dip ed part-time, which is not of great value these days, because I think you've got to do a Masters of Teaching. But it was useful, and my teaching pracs were very interesting with people like Ian Hansen, who was in charge of teaching English. I took his English classes for 5 or 6 weeks at Trinity Grammar, and he was a wonderful teacher and a great mentor. And in fact, he ended up being on the Xavier College Council a few years later. Terrific, a lovely man. And then I did my religious studies teaching out at Heidelberg Tech with year 7 and 8 boys and girls. And that was good too, because I hadn't had any experience with co-education until then. And I haven't had much since, for that matter. But I've always loved the schools and the community aspect of it and the pastoral network aspect of it as well. They're just they're extraordinary networks.
Father Chris, you had positions of leadership in a couple of Jesuit schools at Xavier College and at St Ignatius Riverview. What does a Jesuit bring in particular to educational leadership in secondary schools?
That's a good question. I think our spirituality, really, our Ignatian spirituality. I've often said that if there were no Jesuits in the school, we would have to rely very heavily on our lay leaders to imbue that spirit, and I'm pretty confident that they could do that. But without that Ignatian spirituality, we'd just be any ordinary high school, I suppose. That sounds a little bit harsh, but I think it's true. it's what gives us our fuel, and what gives us our direction. And so as a leader in the school, I think that's certainly what I tried to develop, and still doing that in my own modest chaplaincy work in the school. But that certainly is the most important thing I think that we would bring to it, as well as our own formation and training. I think one of the things about Jesuit formation is that it does make us good generalists and versatile, and one needs to be very versatile, I think, in a school context these days.
Chris, you mentioned there the important place of Ignatian spirituality, our Ignatian tradition in schools. For the last 10 years or so, you haven't been directly involved in schools, though you've been involved in different ways, but more directly involved for some of that time in Ignatian spirituality, giving of retreats and spiritual direction. How has that been for you? How have you found that, being more full-time involved in that work over some years?
Well, certainly when I was in Brisbane, I was traveling all over the country, really, giving presentations to all sorts of groups, not necessarily Catholic groups, but Lutheran groups, a lot of school work, a lot of parish work. And the Ignatian spirituality is such a rich spirituality and such a practical one that, the work was valued, I think. I've given a lot of clergy retreats. I think probably, at least a quarter of the dioceses in Australia, I've given clergy retreats. And again, I think the diocesan clergy value that Ignatian spirituality.
When you talk about your entry into education, of course, your first engagement with Jesuit education was being at a Jesuit school yourself. And was it during your time at school that you began to consider being a Jesuit yourself? Was that part of your vocation journey?
Oh, very much so. I mean, I began with the Jesuits right back at Cosca Hall. Sadly, that campus is closing this year. Very, very sad, really. But we had some wonderful Jesuit teachers down there. And then on the senior campus, much the same thing. And I think that, I can always remember one of the two things that attracted me towards the Jesuits. One was their commitment, and the other was that they seemed to be happy in what they were doing, and they're doing all sorts of things. Apart from their teaching, they might have been directing musicals or plays or orchestras or coaching football teams or whatever. And they seemed, to really enjoy that. The other thing that I think was important in my vocation anyway was the what we used to call a sodality retreat. I think in our last years of school, year 11 and 12, it was then, we had a silent retreat, or more or less silent retreat, out at Loyola College Watsonia, which was the formation monastery in those days for the society, for the Jesuits. And we had some wonderful retreat directors, Father John Hamilton Smith, Father Con Finn, and there were lines and lines of Jesuit scholastics and novices walking the corridors and working in the gardens, whatever. And often I thought to myself, I wonder if that life is for me. And so eventually, at the end of year 12, Father Toddy O'Donovan was the prefect of studies, and he called me in and he said, are you interested in the society? And I said, yes, I am. And so it went from there. But that retreat was, for a lot of people, was very, very, formative, but I think it also produced a lot of vocations. We don't have that sort of retreat these days. I think probably the closest thing we have is the Kairos retreat for year 11 and year 12 students, which Julian could talk a lot about because he's experienced that a few times this year and probably before that. But over about, I think Chris Middleton, who leads those retreats, said he's taken nearly 6,000 boys from the 3 schools that he's been in, 6,000 young people through that experience, and for them it's a life-changing experience.
Chris, you mentioned being attracted to Jesuits who seemed happy in whatever they were doing. Has it been your experience being happy in what the different things you've done as a Jesuit?
Oh yeah, very much so. And I've been privileged to be asked to do different things, and very much so. I mean, as I think Robin mentioned at the start, I was headmaster here at this school, and similarly at St Ignatius College, Riverview. I don't think, well, I didn't like all of that job, but I liked about 98% of it, in the sense that, you could make an impact on the school. And if you enjoy working with people, you're in a privileged position. There are some, tough things you have to do and tough decisions you have to make in those roles. But certainly I was very happy in that work. I was very happy in my retreat work, because you're meeting such a variety of people across Australia. And they were there because they wanted to be there, or at least most of them were keen to be there. And so, yeah, you feel as though you were achieving something and having an impact.
Chris, you've mentioned your passion for education and for Ignatian spirituality. There's another passion in your life which I'm surprised you've restrained yourself from speaking about to this point, a passion for golf. And the fans of your writing have heard a whisper that you've been working for some time on a book on the spirituality of golf. Is that just a lie, or is that fake news, or is that true?
No, it's true. I've taken a long time to actually put it together. Whether it'll be publishable, I don't know. But golf is a very spiritual game. I've given it to a publisher, and he hasn't got back to me with great enthusiasm at this stage. But we'll see. But yeah, I love the game, and it's a challenging game in itself, but it's also a very social game. You meet people there. You meet all sorts of people. People, religious people, non-religious, angry people, and yeah, no, it's been a great delight.
Advice of keeping your head down and your hands close to your heart, is that we've just got another minute or two. Is that the sort of advice you might give to someone, a young man today who was considering society, or would you have some other kind of advice you might give him?
Well, very basically, I think that there's no harm in saying to somebody, give it a try. My sense was that, going when the question was asked of me, are you interested in joining? I thought to myself, if I don't try this, I'll often, I may regret it for the rest of my life. And I certainly don't regret the fact that I chose to give it a try. And the society is an extraordinary group of people, and it's a wonderful community across the world. I've been fortunate enough to travel and meet lots of Jesuits and lay people, Ignatian leaders in various contexts, and I've been privileged. Really, the vocation is a privilege, and I can remember associates in the noviceship when we were first starting, so always drumming into us, with privilege goes responsibility. And so, yeah, it's, I would not be afraid to say to a young person who was tossing up, oh, give it a try, give it a good go, and see what happens.
Thank you very much, Chris. Thanks for that advice, and thanks for all you've shared of your vocation, your joy in your vocation, and the different aspects of it, and for giving us your time today. God bless you.
A pleasure. God bless. Thank you.